Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Stories of Awakening podcast. Today, I'm with Torie. She's the founder of Sacred Ancestry, and I've been working with her for the last year. We were diving deep into ancestral healing. We are towards the end of my mentorship. And so this is the subject that I studied the most in the last year. And so I thought it would be great to talk to an expert about it. And I haven't spoke about ancestral healing until now. So I thought it was a good idea to start talking about it more. So welcome, Torie. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Valentina. I'm so excited. This feels like a full circle moment after all the time we've shared together, after you diving so deep into these studies and into our training to be able to offer ancestral healing work that we get to now be on a podcast together. And it's your podcast. I'm just so honored.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so grateful that you accepted to do this with me. So, as always, I start, since the podcast is called Stories of Awakening, I start with the story of the guest. So, would you like to share your story with us?
Yeah, it's it's a story that really spans through my life. And as I share this story for all of you who are listening, the invitation is to feel the places that this story has also lived in you. I really believe that the story of this life that I've lived is an archetypal path. It's like an archetypal pattern that so many of us have lived in our own ways. And it's a story of disconnection and then going into grief and yearning and eventually finding my way to the ancestors, to remembering who I am and where I come from. And so, in whatever way you relate, just an invitation to drink this story in as nectar and as an example of how it can look, what it might look like for you, even for you on your path of remembrance. So, I grew up in a culture that does not really talk about who we are and where we come from an ancestral perspective. I myself grew up outside of Los Angeles, and I believed that I had inherited a culture of fast cars and celebrities and fast food and materialism and all of these things that were very surface level, and not even surface level, but a lot of things that are really illusory, that aren't true in what the deep meaning is behind life. So I grew up in kind of like this Los Angeles hologram, this like Hollywood hologram. And throughout that experience growing up here, I was raised Jewish. My father's line is Jewish, my mother's line is Catholic, but she converted to Judaism. And both of my ancestors come from Eastern Europe. So I grew up as this white Jewish girl in this culture of materialism. And I went to Hebrew school to learn how to read Hebrew and write Hebrew, but I didn't learn anything spiritual about this religion or really the deep, ancient, mystical roots of Judaism, which are Kabbalah, which go back to times of ancient priests, which go back to the Ark of the Covenant, which go back to the tree of life and the different sephirot that has been studied, and that was also in Egypt, Hermetic Kabbalah. So I grew up not understanding, not knowing that there was any spirituality in my lineage. It was just, you do this because you do this. You carry on this tradition to get bat mitzvahed. But I was really blessed with parents who loved to travel, and they felt it was really important for us to travel and for me to see other cultures and how they lived, to understand our privilege. And so wherever we went, for some reason, even from an early age, from like 6 years old, I always said, take me to the ruins. And it was there in the ruins that I felt a sense of spirituality, that I felt a sense of there's something more than this culture I've been raised in. And in all of these sacred ancient sites that I felt so called to, we would often have a tour guide. And I was able to ask that tour guide any question that I wanted. And I would ask questions like, what were their ceremonies like? What were their beliefs about the afterlife? What was life like for these ancient people? And so I became spiritually fed by learning about the ancient ones And it was there walking through these sacred sites and these ruins that I felt my body come alive with a remembrance that I did not have words for. I didn't know the word spirituality, but that's where I felt that essence. And so, fast forward, when it was time for me to choose what I would study in school, I studied cultural anthropology, which is the study of human culture. And I specified my studies on Indigenous cultures and Indigenous rights. I took a class called shamanism. I took a class called Taoism. I took a class called the Nine Tribes of Oregon that was taught by an Indigenous woman. Took a class called Anthropology of Indigenous Studies, Human Rights, and the Environment. It was the most incredible portal into immersing in these studies of these cultures. And when I graduated, I went and I lived and volunteered on a Native American reservation for a year in Arizona. It was the Tohono O'odham Reservation, working with the Tohono O'odham and the Hi'achid O'odham tribes. And my whole life, I carried this belief that the Indigenous people carry the knowledge and the wisdom that's needed to turn humanity around, to help us remember who we are, to help us return back into a healthy, loving relationship with the earth and with each other. And so I devoted my life, especially for that year on the reservation, I devoted myself to being an ally, to seeing what I could possibly do to help this culture in being passed down to the next generations. Because with Native American cultures and with Indigenous cultures all over the world, they really are threatening colonization. Many of their languages are on the verge of extinction. This is very real. We're in these times when these cultures they could be passed on, or they could, in many ways, die out, certain parts of these cultures and these wisdoms. So for that year, I worked on different cultural revitalization projects. I worked in the native language class. I was one of the assistant teachers. It was taught for free at the public library. And I also worked on some other projects with my dear friend, Victor Garcia, who's from those tribes. And our goal was to help the elders pass down the wisdom, pass down the ceremonies, pass down the language to the children and to the next generations. Long story short, after this year of me showing up every day, pouring my heart out, thinking creatively, how can we get the youth interested, working with elders on the lesson plans for the language class, just pouring my heart out, pouring my heart out, pouring my heart out. I sat with Victor on this mountain, on his land, on the reservation, the sacred mountain of their people. And tears started streaming down my face because I realized after a year of working with Victor, I felt like we had failed. We had all these intentions. We really wanted to pass down the language and the ceremonies to the youth, but the youth at the time weren't interested. They had a lot of trauma, understandably, and they were not at all interested in carrying on the culture or learning the language. So tears streamed down my face as I told Victor I felt like we had failed. And I said, I hope and I pray with every ounce of my being that your people never know what it feels like to not have a culture of substance to inherit. I know what it's like to come from a culture that's so freaking disconnected, that does not honor the ancient ways. It's a culture that's nosediving, that's unsustainable, that's eating the earth's resources, that's not keeping the future generations in mind. And I could go on and on and on down that path, right? All the things that our modern culture doesn't honor and where that's taking us as a humanity. And I told him, I hope you never feel the grief and the disconnection and the rage that I feel at not having a culture to inherit. And something clicked in me. And I realized I am a white Jewish woman sitting up on this mountain on a reservation, trying to get the youth to go to the elders to receive the knowledge. I am that youth that's not going to my own culture. And this thing that I'm trying to prevent from happening, this disconnection, this culture dying out, the wisdom being lost or forgotten, that actually happened to my ancestors. And so I realized in that moment, my ancestors must have had this at some point. And I'm actually trying to help this tribe and these people because I'm coming from a wound of separation, a wound of deep grief. And there is a lot of grief. And I've felt this, and a lot of my clients have felt this, a deep, deep grief around not having those original teachings of our ancient ancestors. What was lost from, for example, the church going in and burning the witches, killing the healers, stamping out the indigenous knowledge that they label as paganism. But all of our ancestors, even those in Europe, had these indigenous ways of living with the earth, honoring the earth, working with her cycles. They had their own medicine songs, they had their own ceremonies, they had their own wisdom. But it was brutally taken. And some people kept it alive, but that was at great risk. And so there's a deep, deep grief that we all have to feel in order to find and remember that that wisdom lives in us too. And so as I sat up on this mountain feeling this grief, I realized that my whole life I was pointing my finger outside of myself and I was saying, all of the wisdom lives in these indigenous people. We need to help them keep it, which I still believe we're here to support them in every way that we possibly can, these unbroken lineages. But what I had to do is I had to point that finger back at myself and say, this wisdom lives in me and in my lineage too, somewhere down the line. And it's my responsibility to do my work, to reclaim that wisdom, to heal these wounds so that I can show up in a good way to support these indigenous people. Otherwise, I'm showing up from a wound. I want to show up with a deep connection to my own lineage, with a deep connection to my own ancestors, being that youth who goes to her elders instead of trying to help these youth go to theirs. We need all of us together doing this work. And I believe that's a part of what will heal the wounds of colonization, the wounds of the Western world. It's not just about the indigenous people being uplifted. That's vitally important. It's also about each of us doing that work so that we're not repeating old wounds, old cycles, and old patterns, perpetuating the same traumas over and over and over again that keep us disconnected from the earth and from each other. So that was 12 years ago that this all happened, but that was the beginning of my journey. And since then, I've been on a deep path of devoting my life to these studies.
Wow. Thanks so much for sharing all of that. Beautifully explained also. Yeah, my journey was very different, but I can really understand what you mean about the grief of not having, indigenous culture here in Italy or in Europe generally. Um, so it didn't happen just in Los Angeles or around there. I feel is everywhere, also in Europe. And I got to the same conclusion that you just shared just now after this journey with you. I was also fascinated by, indigenous culture over there in America. Since I was little, my favorite cartoon was Pocahontas. So there was always this interest, but I never studied really deep these things. I didn't even know where to find the material when I was younger. But I realized really just with this journey with you and this mentorship that actually what I want to do now is understanding what happened here in Italy, in Europe, and of course, every country in Europe have a different, probably indigenous culture, but it's definitely something that I don't see many people talk about, and I don't know many friends that actually even ask themselves these questions, you know. So I think I want to make it part of my mission for sure, reconnecting with those roots and doing the research myself first, because they didn't teach this at school. There are no movies about that. Of course, they talk about witches, but we know even Hollywood didn't really help with the image of witches, you know? And everyone thinks it's about dark magic. So the last couple of posts that I made were really about that. And even say the word witch over here, even about among my friends, I can really see their faces, you know, it's scary. It's scary. We are so programmed, it's passed down for so many generations. And so I really would like to make people understand what these witches really were and what they were doing. And that's actually our indigenous culture before the church. So, yeah, that's what I am studying these days. But I arrive at the same conclusion much later than you just now. So I'll do what I can from now on. But thanks for sharing all of that. And it's amazing that you understood these things so early. Not that there is a better way, or or everyone is in a different journey, but it's amazing, I think, that you started so early.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And yeah, I'm just, one step ahead of some of us and 1,000 steps behind others, right? Like we're all at different places on our journey. And I really want to speak to what you just shared about the witches, how they've been portrayed, and the ways that we've seen them in our cultures, and how that's actually been a huge block to connecting with our own ancestral wisdom and indigenous life ways. And that has actually been perpetuating the witch wound in ourselves and in our culture. So, just like you shared, the culture of the witches, we were labeled as witches in a negative light, in a bad way, from the church, from the patriarchy. But the word witch, when you track the etymology of this word, which is the history of this word, you find that this word actually means wise woman. It means healer. And in many cultures all over the world, they had different words for witch that were connected to the shamanic path. It was she who could see beyond the veil, she who knew how to work with the herbs, she who knew how to commune with the ancestors. It was a profoundly powerful position that those of us in modern day, if we're beginning to study Indigenous studies and open our minds and our hearts to Indigenous wisdom, they are the medicine people. They're the medicine women and the medicine men. They're the traditional healers. They're those who carry on the healing practices. And so if in a lot of us, there is this separation that just shows that the church and the patriarchal structures succeeded in what they tried to do. They tried, this is the process of colonization that also happened in cultures all over the world. When Europe would arrive, for example, here in the US on indigenous land, what they would do in their process to bring indigenous peoples into their mainstream culture in the church was they would demonize their own culture. They would say, you're wrong, this is bad. And they would try to convert them to see their own ancestors as evil, their own ancestral ways as evil. This is the deepest form of Black magic, in fact. That is Black magic, is what the church did by coming in, deeply traumatizing people. And I don't need to go on and on, but we know the horrific, horrific, horrific things that happened, the enslavement. And this is all a form of Black magic. And so when we talk about witches, when we talk about Black magic and white magic, it's understanding that it wasn't only witches in the traditional sense of the word that wielded magic. Black magic is currently being wielded by those in power, whether we like to believe it or not, and whether it looks like rituals or not, whatever you believe is happening, Black magic is a form of mind control, and it's a form of turning people against their own intuitive wisdom. And so the greatest form of liberation, the greatest form of freedom, the greatest form of resistance that we can do is to connect back in with our own channel, to connect back in with our own intuition, to connect back in with our own healing gifts, to connect back in with our own ancestral gifts and ancestral connection. Because when we do that, we are clear and connected to source, and nothing can take our power from us. That was feared by the church because it is so powerful. That has the power to change the systems that have caused oppression. That has the power to create a new earth. So, of course, that was demonized by the church because they wanted the power. But the fact is that we are each that powerful. So, when we talk about witches, it's like flipping the patriarchal programming on its head.
Yeah.
And saying it's not my ancestors' traditions that were black magic, it's these systems of oppression. And reclaiming the deep threads of white magic. Also, those terms white and black magic are problematic in themselves for racially.
Absolutely.
But let's go with the mainstream way of putting it. White magic, the magic of love, magic of healing, that all of our lineages had somewhere down the line. So for all of those of you who are listening, who are thinking, yeah, but my lineage was nothing but trauma. My lineage was nothing but bad news. The truth is that somewhere down the line, perhaps it was hundreds of years ago, perhaps it was thousands of years ago, somewhere down the line, you have ancestors who were healers. You have ancestors who were good grandmothers, good grandfathers, honest people, who were artists, who were revolutionaries, who were medicine men and women, who were seers, who were oracles, who were ceremonialists, who were spiritual leaders, who were fire tenders. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. And just because you might have seen your ancestors, perhaps grandparents or parents, in a negative light, that does not mean that that's the truth of your entire lineage. So we are here to strip away the masks of illusion and look far beneath the surface. Look far beneath just this moment in time in the last 3 generations. You have hundreds of generations before you. You have tens of thousands of ancestors before you. And so when you connect in with your healed, wise, and well ancestors somewhere down the line, you begin to weave that thread of remembrance and reclaim their gifts and reclaim their magic and reclaim the purity that lives at the heart of your lineage. And you're able to utilize that connection to your intuition, your gifts, and your ancestors to heal yourself and your lineage. So that's the whole study that Valentina has been diving into this past year, is how to do that healing work. But that's just a little bit about witches and how we can understand them, because the fact is that witches were just healers. And very often, witches were just people who were persecuted. Some of them weren't healers. Many people were persecuted just because someone didn't like them, or someone wanted to steal their land, or someone wanted to just get them off the game board. So having compassion for the healers, the medicine men, the medicine women who were killed, and shifting our cultural view of the word witch to see that it was changed from wise woman to mean something bad. So we're here to reclaim that and change that story in our lineages.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. Yeah, and thanks also for mentioning that we all have wise and healed ancestors, even if we don't consciously remember them, because we might go back to our great grandparents and what the people that we meet. And I don't think many people think about that. And that's as you said, what you taught me, how to guide people to connect to the wise and well ancestors. And so understand the root cause also of these dysfunctions that we have in our families and these toxic patterns. Sometimes we cannot go back just to our parents or grandparents, even if we might see the consequences on them already, but to heal the root cause, we need to go back maybe many, many, many generations back. And what I wanted to say is that many people recently, they are on this healing journey for a while now. I really heard many times recently that what they're healing right now, they feel is not from this life. They all feel they're starting to heal something ancestral and something that they don't even know where it's coming from, but they have an idea that maybe, women in their family had that problem or men in their family had that problem. So I think, and I don't know if you notice the same, but I think probably this is really the time where we are starting to go deeper in the healing. It's not just about maybe our childhood wound that of course are also connected probably to ancestral wounds, but not healing traumas just from this life, but I think we are going deeper as a collective. And if we go back in time enough, we all have the same ancestors. And so if we heal at that level, we really can heal humanity.
Mm. Yes, it goes so deep. And for those of you who feel like there's something in your life, in your field, that isn't just yours, there are so many connections and so many layers to that. And like Valentina said, they can all be related, right? Like inner child healing and ancestral healing are deeply, deeply, deeply related because when we are children, we are absorbing the beliefs, the energies, the worldview of our parents. We're like sponges that are receiving, receiving, receiving. But the truth is that your parents, when they were children, were also sponges receiving from their parents. And your grandparents, when they were children, were like sponges receiving from your great grandparents. And so inner child healing is very, very tied to ancestral healing. That's where some of the deepest ancestral patterns are passed down. And of course, there's also the level of the genes and what's alive in our nervous systems, in our bloodline, and in our energetics.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the level of the inner child, there's the ancestral level, there can be past life influences, there can be your people that you surround yourself with, if you're empathic, especially, and the different energies that you might be processing for other people around you, whether you know it or not. And then being alive in these times in the collective when there's so much purging through us. And especially for those of us who hold the archetype of the empath or of the healer, we are generally more open to those energies that we can be processing that aren't just our own. And that's a whole topic in itself. But something that I will say is that whatever it is that you're processing in healing, even if it doesn't feel like it's your own, it's hooking into something in you of where that wound also lives. And so, for example, if you see an ancestral pattern in your life or in your lineage, you're probably aware of how that lives within you, where that lives within you, the parts of you that can in some way relate to that pattern or the ways that you're seeing that pattern playing out. And so as we dive into this healing work, it takes awareness, it takes self-honesty, and it takes the courage to look at where does this also live in me? And I believe that this is also a very important question to ask when we're looking at what we judge externally in the collective, right? This is a time of so much separation, so much polarity, so many people disagreeing and othering others. And it also happens within us. Where within us are we othering others? Where within us are we judging others as good or bad or right or wrong, right? And so in order for us to create a new earth, to step forward as these clear channels, it's not that we are better than others. This is just a reinforcement of a hierarchy that is not true. It is allowing ourselves to purify ourselves on our physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, energetic, and ancestral levels through all of our lifetimes, through all timelines, through our bloodlines, by finding what wounds out there in the world live in me too. Where can I begin to pull on that thread? Find where it hooks into you. Find the emotion it bubbles up in you, or find where it activates something in your body. Like maybe you feel a blockage in your left shoulder. And when you begin to pull on that thread of whatever triggers you, whatever impacts you or energizes you, when you begin to pull on that thread, then you can do your part of the great work of helping your lineage, of helping humanity transition into a new earth. So it's a path of radical responsibility. And it can sound really big, it can sound really scary, it can sound really heavy. But the truth is that it can be done with so much love and with so much magic and so much depth and so much meaning, that can be a path of great joy. Really, this is a path of enlightenment, which just means bringing light to your shadows, bringing more light into those places within yourself that you haven't wanted to look, bringing more light into those parts of yourself that you have shamed or that you have pushed away to the shadows because you're too scared to go there. And so there's a way to do this work, to approach this work, that doesn't need to be scary. The shadows are only scary because we've been pushing them away and keeping them in the darkness. But when we bring our light, the light of our love, the light of our healed ancestors, the light of our gifts into the shadows, we illuminate them. And we see that the big monster we thought was there is oftentimes a really scared inner child. Right? So lots of directions we could go with that, but that's just what I wanted to flow through.
Oh, well, amazing. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask you, because I remember you said this the first time to me, and it really made me think, and I never thought about that before, but how you connect ancestral healing with healing the earth.
I would actually love for you to share what have you been learning, and then I can add to it.
Yeah, okay. I so what really kind of shocked me even was thinking about the fact that, which I mentioned even earlier, if we go back enough, we all have the same ancestors, which our first ancestor, if we think about it, is Mother Earth. We're all coming from the earth. And I never thought about that. And so doing ancestral healing, it reconnects you to nature in a much deeper level. And it is also so needed now, because it's not just humanity that is suffering, but the earth is suffering a lot these days. So I think it's really, ancestral healing is the solution for, a lot of the problems that we have, even considering, the earth, one of our ancestors.
Absolutely. Yeah, what Valentina is pointing to too is part of my teachings are that our original feminine ancestors were the earth and the waters. We come from this earth. And connecting to the earth is an act of ancestral healing, especially for those of us who live in this culture that's so disconnected from the earth. We live in these air-conditioned boxes, and bless air conditioning and bless our homes and our safety that they've afforded us. But we've lived in this culture that's so disconnected from nature. It's like, oh, I'm going to go on a hike in nature, rather than seeing that as returning to our home, returning to sacred ceremonial grounds where we're in deep connection and communion with the ways that our ancestors lived for millennia. And so if connecting to the earth is an act of ancestral healing, every time we place our hand on a tree, every time we sing to a river, every time we sit on the earth, we are tapping into the ancestral memory that lives within the earth. So Mother Earth has seen all of our ancestors. All of our ancestors have walked on this earth at some point. The earth remembers their names, their tears, their laughter, their stories, their voices, their songs. Mother Earth holds all of that memory, and especially her stones, her stone people. They're considered the record keepers. So when we connect to the earth, we're not only connecting back with our original mother, we're also connecting in with the memories of our ancestors that she holds. And for some of us, when we place our hand on a big stone, we may actually remember or be shown what happened there on that land. So for example, here in the United States, because my ancestors are from Europe, I don't have ancestors who lived on this land more recently. So when I place my hand on a stone, sometimes I'm shown or I feel the memory of the ancient ancestors of these lands, the different tribes. For example, here I live in Topanga, California. This is the land of the Chumash and the Tongva peoples. And so a part of my practice, whenever I go out onto the land and take a few breaths and connect with nature, I greet the ancestors of the land. I thank them for allowing me to be here on their lands. And I feel the ancestral memory of them that lives in these lands. And we can be in communication and in relationship with them. So honoring not only our ancestors of blood, but also the ancestors of the land. And there are other types of ancestors too, ancestors of soul lineage, ancestors of path. There's so many different kinds. But just to focus on more of this element of earth connection and healing with the earth and ancestral healing is when we reconnect with the earth as our source of remembrance and as our source of life force energy, it's actually a very deep deprogramming of all the places that we've been falsely plugged into and sourcing our energy from. For instance, I can speak from personal experience. This happened to me recently. I recently completed an 8-day oak dieta, which is a traditional South American shamanic practice where you ingest the tea of a certain plant or a certain tree for at least 8 days minimum. And during those 8 days, there's nothing else you do. You eat food that has no flavor, no salt, no herbs, and you meditate all day long. You're in silence all day long. You don't use soap or deodorant. Nothing else goes into your system except that plant, that tree, and the most basic of food. And during those 8 days, you're also disconnected from the world. You don't have contact through the outside world. You don't have screens. You don't have phones. You're literally just sitting on the earth for 8 days. And for me, I was sitting under this oak tree for 8 days. And what I felt, a part of my experience of what happened was it unplugged me from the matrix of where I was sourcing my power. And I realized that I was, in many ways, sourcing my power through relationships, through social media, through my business, through my identity that I had built in the world. It unplugged me from this false source of my power and plugged me back into the earth. It plugged me back into source. And it was a very deep shedding. I knew mentally, and I practice in all my practices, and I do deep spiritual work all the time to connect to source, to connect to the earth. Like this is, it's in every single session that we do, Valentina, connect to the earth and connect to source. But it's another thing entirely to actually deprogram what we have been connected into and to connect back to what our ancestors connected to, Mother Earth. So, yeah, a long way to say that connecting to the earth is an act of ancestral healing. It's an act of ancestral remembrance. And like you said, it reminds us that we are all connected in this web of life, that we all share our Mother Earth. And without her, without our original feminine ancestor, we're a people who are lost and disconnected. And the more that we're lost and disconnected, the more that we hurt our Mother Earth. And in doing so, the more that we hurt ourselves. We're hurting our source of our life.
Beautiful. Thank you. I also remember you saying something else that I didn't think about before, and it was the importance of bringing back all these rituals and kind of gatherings like our ancestors used to do, indigenous people are doing and used to do. And because we all are so disconnected, as you said, and we all have this trauma growing up. We have all these emotions that nobody taught us how to process and release and manage. And now there are practices like meditation and breath work that are going more mainstream, but I don't think the majority of people are doing them anyway. But these gatherings were so important because they were helpful to release all of these stuck emotions, traumas or things that didn't serve us anymore. And so I think if we bring back this to society, we will be so much healthier than what we are right now. And they're also not always fun. Of course, sometimes there are shadows that are coming up that you don't want to see and you have to see them to heal them. But I think it would be is what everyone wants in the end of the day. We all want to dance and sing together and shake off all the stress. And so many people are ashamed of dancing. They don't feel like they can dance and they are afraid of how they look. But dancing is so much deeper than that, the same as singing, and really bringing back those traditions and those gatherings, I think would be so healing and so much fun also for people. It would really help release everything that we have now stuck in our system because we don't have any way to get rid of those.
Amen. It's so true what you say. First of all, just I can feel the joy in you sharing this. It's like just to remember that these ancestral tools and technologies were life-giving. They were a source of celebration. They were a way for people to come together to remember who they are. There's so much that can be said about the traditional rituals and ceremonies and cultures all over the world. It's one of my obsessions of study. And what many of them all have in common is that healing for our ancestors was not done in isolation. Healing was always done in the context of community, in the context of culture, and in the context of the ancestral traditions. So, for example, gathering around a fire or gathering in a ceremonial space, it was not just a space to go through the motions of doing a certain ritual. It was a space where the ritual was fully alive. Rituals are not meant to be stagnant. First you do this, then you do this, then you do that. They are meant to be living, embodied transmissions where the energy and the essence of the ancestors and of the divine realms and of the natural realms move through us to affect healing here in this life. So this is the spiritual energy. Here in the physical, we're doing things, right? Whether we're doing a dance, whether we're singing certain songs, whether we're making certain offerings, we're doing these things in the physical. But it's so much more than just the physical. This is an invitation for the ancestors to move through us, for emotions to be transmuted, for divine forces to come and be welcome and to affect change in our hearts and in our communities. And just like you were saying, there were different rituals that today, because we don't have those rituals, we're stuck in these cycles of unprocessed emotion and of isolation and feeling like we can't process something or move forward. So rites of passage, initiatory rites of passage that were done, for example, when a boy would become a man or a girl would become a woman, these differ culture to culture, but something that they all have in common is it ritualized a transformation of energy for that person and a transformation in how they were seen by their entire community. So it wasn't just their own inner transformation that happens for them alone and only impacts them alone. Each person going through their rite of passage ritual was witnessed by community, was held in community. And very often, after this rite of passage ritual, the initiate would either receive a new name and the whole community would call them a new name, or they would then wear a different kind of hairstyle. So they would be known that they had passed through that initiation ritual, or they would then wear a different color or type of pattern that was on their clothing. Different tribes all over the world practiced this so that in your culture, you were understood as, oh, this person has passed through this certain ritual, and now we can regard them as being on this kind of level of their life path and life journey. But because we live in a modern culture that doesn't have these rites of passage rituals, very often that energy that wants to be transformed, that deep, deep thing that wants to be moved through that person as they come into the next chapter of their life, doesn't have an avenue or a way to fully transform or to fully come out. And so then oftentimes that energy implodes, causing for that person to cycle in old patterns or to act out in ways that are destructive for themselves or for communities. For example, one of many examples I could give is in ancient cultures, there were rites of passage for the boys to become men. And sometimes it was a hunting trip where they would go out and they would do a hunt and they would need to bring back a certain kind of animal or a certain kill to their community. Sometimes it was actually going into war where boys would become warriors. They would either come back or they wouldn't. So they were put in these life or death situations. They were put in these very real situations that would test their limits physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And they would either pass through that threshold or they wouldn't. And there were both different consequences either way in what that looked like. So it wasn't a promised thing. It was something that they actually had to put themselves in a position of great risk to pass through. And for the men, for the masculine energy, it was very often a physical thing. It's like they needed to break through something on a physical level. And in today's modern society, because we don't have those rites of passage that are very important, like if you think of the energy of a preteen boy or a teenage boy, there is so much anger welling up within them. There's so much energy. There's so much testosterone. Like this is an actual physical and emotional process that boys all over the world go through. It's a part of what we pass through as we are passing through puberty and into manhood. But in our modern society, because they don't have these rites of passage, oftentimes those boys will take that energy and it will come out in a different way. Mm-hmm. For example, they might join a gang or they might get involved with the wrong crowd and start doing different crimes, or they might take out their violence on women, or they might turn to addiction and to drugs. These are all ways that subconsciously on a deep human level and ancestral level, but this is just like the basic of core humanity, they have energy that they're needing to transmute. They have energy they're needing to channel or guide in a certain direction, but they don't have the elders, they don't have the rituals, they don't have the ceremonies to guide them to do that in a good way that's productive for them and their community. And so there are movements these days of men who are creating these rites of passage, who are creating these experiences for young boys or for men, fully grown men, to go through this experience now and to move their energy. For instance, my dear cousin who's staying here with me right now at my home, looking out the window, seeing him out there, he guides young boys on wilderness trips, on wilderness journeys, where they learn the core parts of how to survive in wilderness. They meet their edges of hunger and of group dynamics. They're guided through ceremonies and rituals out there in nature, just the way that our ancestors did. And they come back changed. They come back different. This is a rite of passage. And then there are communities where fully grown men go. They need to scream it out. They need to grieve it out. They need to be held by men in community to come back into right relationship with themselves and forgive themselves for things that they did from not knowing how to channel that energy previously in ways that it has caused harm for them and their loved ones and community. So this is just like a little bit of the example of what happens in a culture where we don't have those things and what can happen in a culture when we reclaim them and when we remember the ways of our ancestors, and that these rituals and ceremonies weren't just for fun. Like they, oftentimes were beautiful, but they were deeply necessary and needed to create not just personal health, but community health as well.
Absolutely, Torie. Like this is so important to say. And yeah, those were initiations, basically, right? To a different stage of life. And we get them anyway, but we don't know how to handle them because life happens anyway, whether you go hunting or not and transmute that energy. So yeah, and we, as you said, we don't have guidance for these things. So you either probably are an old soul and you realize the direction that is better to go for you in terms of your evolution, or you might get stuck in the cycles that are a bit more toxic and a bit more destructive maybe. So yeah, I've seen more and more men, but in general, people doing gatherings and this kind of retreats, as you mentioned, that are really, really transformative. But even just where I met my husband, for example, I went to a festival where, you gather with other people they're passionate about self-development and growth, and we dance and sing all together. There is a sense of community, there is safety, and they are life-changing. And they're more and more common, but I think they're not as common. Not everyone that I know went to a festival of that type. Of course, there are different types of festival, but they can really change your life.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think this is the part of the beauty of the times that we live in is we have a connection to study the ancient indigenous ways, to remember them, to practice them if we so choose in our own lives. And we also see the ways that those indigenous wisdoms are being recreated in the modern times in a way that doesn't need to feel like it's this ancient relic, but in a way that, like we said, is alive. It's filled with this life force. And so we're at this incredible bridge between the past and the future, where people are wanting to remember indigenous wisdom and are also like, okay, how do we incorporate this in a way that is deeply practical and relevant and fun and alive for these times that we're living in? And so that's such a perfect example. And just to name something too that was coming through as you were talking is I really want to name that what is repressed must be expressed. And so what if you're repressing, grief or anger or just all of the stuff that's built up over your life, it's going to be expressed somehow. It might come out sideways. It might come out in ways that are harmful or self-destructive, right? Like addictions, numbing, old patterns, etc. Or you can take what is repressed and express it in healthy ways. And so, for example, going to these festivals, going to workshops, processing through this, dancing through this, singing through this, being held through this as you cry tears. And to quote one of my teachers, Isis Indria, she says, sometimes when we cry, we're crying for something that happened 5 minutes ago. And sometimes when we cry, we're crying for something that happened 10,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so allowing your emotions to flow through you, even if you don't know what they're connected to, right? Maybe you're feeling a grief that is so big, like you said, that you know that it's not just from this one life. For some of us, when we dive into ancestral healing work, we find that our own thing that we thought is just our grief is actually the compounded grief of thousands of women before us who weren't able to express and live and share their truth, who weren't able to speak, who weren't able to express their sensuality, their creativity, their life force energy, right? So if we feel grief, imagine all of the women before us. And then we're here opening ourselves responsibly and in a safe space as a channel to let that energy move and express out through us in ways that are healthy and life-giving, and get to transmute and alchemize that grief into expression of love, of healing, of joy, a new way that we get to create our lineage. And so if all of that grief is repressed and not expressed, it's still going to express, but in ways that aren't so healthy, right? But if we channel it and express it in ways that are healthy, then there's no limit to what we can create, the healing that happens in our lives and in our lineages. And so, yes, I believe festivals and ancestral healing sessions and gathering with our communities and doing our own ceremonies, even if it's just one person, you on the earth doing this work, no matter what the container is that you choose, that's a part of what we're doing is we're unlocking safely through ritual and through ceremony the emotions and the energy that's wanting to transmute through us for ourselves, for our lineage, for the collective, for whatever level or layer you're feeling that you're working on. But that is a part of what we're here to do. Like that is the healing path. That is the ancient path. And this goes back as far as time itself. Humans gathering around with the elements, fire, water, earth, air, ether, the ancestors to do this work. But yes, it's usually held in community, and it holds great power when we do it in community spaces.
Amazing. I have one more question and then I can let you go. So what people can do to connect to their ancestors. If they never done it, they don't know where to start. What is an easy way to start this journey?
Mm. I love this question. And part of why I love this question, and this might be putting you on the spot, but is because I know that you can answer it. And I know that you're interviewing me, but I really just want to provide you the opportunity, Valentina, to share your wisdom, and then I'll add on to it.
Okay. Is this a test? Is it if I pass it or not?
A sacred opportunity.
Yeah. So I would suggest do some research on your ancestors. Even as you taught me, the name of your mom, your dad, your grandma, and the meaning of those names. They tell you a lot about your lineage. And then if you have the possibility, ask questions to your parents or grandparents if they're still alive about other members of the family. And that would be a good start. And if you have time and money, and you can, of course, and you know that your ancestors are from somewhere else, a nice trip on that land would be amazing as well, and might unlock a lot of memories. And a thing that I really liked researching and also creating is because it's very practical, and I think I have a very practical spirituality, is creating an altar, finding pictures of your ancestors and maybe put objects that were valuable for them. Even then, do some research on how creating an altar and sit down with it every day, even, from prayer, meditation, whatever you feel called to. And that's amazing. And I've been reading books about ancestral healing, as you know, and one of them is called Didn't Start With You, which is very, very popular book. And it's not that spiritual, but it's still about ancestral healing and the importance of including, even in an altar, for example, some family members that were kind of forgotten, or nobody talked about them because maybe they were mentally ill and the family was ashamed of them, or whatever was the reason, because they did something wrong. But actually, even just having a picture, lighting a candle, saying, like, you are remembered. We don't have to repeat what you did, or how we'll heal these things for you. It's really, really healing for your lineage.
I am so glad I asked for you to share all of that. It just feels so beautiful because your way of putting it into words is different than me. And that's what we're really awakening here. That's part of the goal of ancestral healing and ancestral connection, is awakening each and every one of us to be the ancestral healer for our own lineage.
Mm-hmm.
So Valentina is that for her lineage. I am one of many from my own lineage. I have, really honoring my cousin and also my brother. Each one of us has the opportunity to become the ancestral healer for our own lineage. And each one of us has a different way of putting to words what that path can look like. And I love that you shared this, and also the order that you shared it in. I really want to name the wisdom in this. First things first, knowing your family history, asking your elders the questions to get the family history, because you never know how long you have with them. Getting to build out your family tree to get those family stories is first priority. And also building the altar. It's so deeply important to build that altar. And you mentioned going to your ancestral homelands if you're able. What I would add, and there's so much, right? Like there's a whole body of work around what it looks like. But what I will add that's a very, very, very simple practice is every day to invite your wise and well ancestors to be with you. So, for those of you who are wondering, well, how do I do that? What does that look like? I'll guide us through a small ancestral invocation. And I'll try to keep this brief because I want to make it really easy to use for everybody here. So, for those of you who are willing and ready to welcome in your wise and well-healed ancestors, remembering that they live somewhere down the line, even if you don't believe that they're there, it's just because you haven't met them yet. So, if you're ready and willing to welcome in your wise and well-healed ancestors, taking a deep breath into your heart, feeling your desire to connect with them, and repeat out loud after me. From the depths of my heart, I call upon my wise and well-healed ancestors. Ancestors with the highest levels of love and compassion. Please be here with me. Please guide me. I welcome your wisdom, your protection, your healing, and your love. I want to see you. I want to feel you. I want to know you. I welcome you into my life with so much love and gratitude. Please walk with me through my day. Please come to me in my dreams. Please guide me on this path of healing. Amen. So that also could be condensed into the smallest little sentence. And the most important thing is that it comes from your heart. So it's not about words, right? Like we said, it's not just about you do this, then you do this, then you do that. It's about keeping it alive, allowing it to feel authentic, allowing it to feel true. And so imagine if you could speak to your wise and well-healed ancestors, what would you say? What do you want to ask for their help with? Maybe you're navigating something in your relationship. Maybe you're wanting their support as you're about to go into an important meeting or a job interview. They're here to help you, not just in the big spiritual ways, but in very practical ways. And so each day when you call upon them, it can be a very general statement of wise and well-heeled ancestors. Please walk with me today. I want to see you, to feel you. I welcome your guidance. Please be here with me, right? It could be that simple, or it could be more specific. Wise and well-heeled ancestors, I'm in a moment that I'm really calling out for your support. I ask that you please guide me in my decisions in my life. I'm really facing some big and important decisions right now, and I want to make these choices from a place of love and from a place of wisdom. Please send me the signs. Please fill me with a knowing of what is the best path for me to walk. The path of liberation, path of healing, path of my highest destiny for myself and our lineage. So you can get as specific as you want, as esoteric or as grounded as you want, and welcome them into your life.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was amazing. Thanks for sharing that with everyone.
Mm.
Thank you for your time as well. I think we are at the end of this interview. Is there any other word of wisdom that is coming through you? Any final thing that you want to say?
Yeah. So in this interview, we touched upon, surprisingly, we didn't know it was going to go in this direction, but we really touched upon, some of the shadowy sides, some of the darker sides of what we're here to transmute. And this is honestly not usually the energy that we work with. It's just, this is what came through today. And so I really just want to close our time together by saying this path can be so filled with joy and filled with light. And we're not just here to heal the wounds of our ancestors, but to connect to the gifts, the beauty, the magic, the power, the spirituality. And for many of us, we feel like because we're here to heal our lineages, it can feel like we have the burden of 1,000 ancestors on our shoulders. Like, really, I have to heal all that, you know? And a lot of us feel that way about ancestral work. A lot of us are very apprehensive or scared to step into the ancestral work because we're afraid it's going to be so heavy and so much work. But I like to offer this, that the burden doesn't rest on your shoulders. The power lives in your hands. You have the ability to step into this work in an empowered way. You have the ability to call upon your wise and well-heeled ancestors to guide you through this work in a way that feels filled with grace, filled with love, filled with lightness, with joy, with revelation, with healing beyond your wildest dreams. So, a part of what Valentina and I are here to do is we're here to shift the cultural perception of ancestral healing. It doesn't need to be heavy. And you are not doing this work alone. Like we shared, healing work is not meant to be done in isolation, it's meant to be done in community. So, first things first, call upon your healed, wise, and well ancestors. Call upon the village of wise ones, healers, spiritual leaders, fire tenders, warriors who have lived in your lineage. Call upon those ancestors of love to work with you. They are your community. And that you don't have to do this alone in the physical either, that you have community around you, whether it's reaching out to myself or Valentina, or whether it's having these conversations with your nearest and dearest loved ones, starting to talk about what it looks like to heal the witch wound, starting to talk about what are some of the gifts that live in your lineage, and looking that beneath every ancestral wound is a gem of healing wisdom, starting to see that there's a reason that you were born into your lineage. Your soul came here not only to heal your lineage, but also to receive the teachings. This is like your soul's school that you were born into, the lineage that you were born into. And it gets so much more fun and so much more easy and so much more magical when you walk this path with others. So I'll leave you with that. And I'm so, so grateful, Valentina. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my God, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for your wisdom, for living your Dharma, for everything that you're doing for making this planet a better place. Thank you.
Likewise, sister. Thank you.
We can do it.
We're doing it. This is
it. Thank you for everything you taught me as well. This last year definitely was life-changing for me. Oh, thank you again. And thanks everyone for listening if you're still here. And I'll catch you at the next episode. Bye, everyone.
Bye.